guys, this is God's Story, I think, number 66, believe it or not. And we're starting early, so those that are in bed back in the States, you'll probably miss some of it. Some of you that are up early, you'll catch some of this. But I've got Ronald Nair, a good friend of mine. We're out here at Bleaksburg Ranch doing a hunt, and all of our friends are here. And if it wasn't up for Ronald here of setting it up, I probably wouldn't be here. But Ronald's been a dear friend of ours. He's followed us a lot on the Facebook, right?
Yeah.
And doing the God stories. We've been talking about God stories even while we're sitting around the table here. And instead of me sharing a God story today or for this morning for you guys, I'd like for Ronald to share a story, because he was telling me something about how he got caught in the marketplace, which I think is a major key for today. So, Ronald, can you just share with them what happened to you, how you got caught into this thing, what happened, what the Lord actually did to you?
Yeah. So, Brad's asked me to talk slow.
Yeah, I told him to talk slow because he even said that's fast.
So, a couple of years back, I was really involved in revival ministries, and my perception in ministry was very much pulpit, outreaches and those kind of stuff. And it just got so God started doing something supernatural. He started doing many things. And I was excited, ready to be ordained as a revival in the marketplace. And I'll never forget one day in a meeting with another revivalist, and he turns around and says, I feel in my heart God's calling many people into the marketplace. I audibly hear God says, that's you. And I really thought to myself, and I said, God, I really don't want to go back in the marketplace. Marketplace is volatile and is dog eat dog, and it's just not an area that I'm used to anymore. And he said, I'm calling you into the marketplace. And couple of weeks later, I had something I was trusting God for that I would do from a working point of view. And a friend of mine in prophetic ministry called. She said, I have a word for you. She said that God's going to come through for you in a way that you not see him come through for you. And it kind of dropped my heart, because I was depending on that particular thing to do. And it swapped completely. God then opened up doors. And I wasn't even sure it was God at the time, because it was exactly 180-degree turn in a completely different direction.
Didn't you say an audible voice spoke to you about it later?
Yeah, so God audibly, as the person spoke to me, I heard God say to me that I'm calling you into the marketplace. And so my question to God was, or my cry to God was like, I really don't want to go. I don't want to go in the marketplace. I've become comfortable in the things of revival. I've become comfortable in the things that I knew, because it was very church-like. And
because you were thinking, church-like or revival or being a minister is basically on the stage behind the pulpit at that time.
That was my only perception of what. That's the only thing that I've seen up until that point. I didn't see the other side of it, that God could do anything, or that God was doing anything in the marketplace. I thought that the church would reach the marketplace, and that's how people would get saved and go back. I didn't actually have a grid for it at all. I didn't have no grid for it. So I wasn't even thinking about it. So it was totally off the radar completely. And for me personally, it was 180-degree in a whole different direction, in a direction I did not know how to take God into the marketplace.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So then the doors opened, and you found yourself in front of in a business meeting, right, with an Asian woman.
So it was actually, a white or Caucasian woman that represented Stellenbosch, which is a suburb in Cape Town in South Africa, to China. And I was actually the third person invited, and the meeting was with my wife, actually, who heads up the marketing for our company. And so we're having a breakfast meeting. And in the breakfast meeting, God gave me a word and said, and the lady who we were with at the time was extremely, extremely funny. So she was telling jokes from every angle possible. And so this was not a church meeting basically.
Right.
And I wasn't even sure what she believed, if she believed anything.
Right.
And that was new to me because everybody I knew knew Jesus.
Right.
So over here, it's like I'm not even sure these people believe anything. So I started.
Of course, over here they have sometimes 125 gods.
Yeah.
Know?
And I wasn't sure which one it was.
Right.
If there was any gods that some people believe in. And as I was sitting and as she was smiling and telling jokes, and she was extremely hilarious, and the Lord said to me that she's smiling on the outside, but inside she's bitter towards me. And He tells me, tell that to her. And in my heart, I just said that could not be God because this lady's extremely funny.
And you're not in church.
We're not in church. I'm not even sure what she believed. And I'm the third person that she's invited. And I wasn't the second person who the meeting was with. And I'm sitting over there and I said, God, I really can't give this word to this lady. And I sat there and I lost my appetite completely. I just couldn't eat. I'm remembering sitting over there and the back of my neck just started sweating. And
sweating.
Yeah. So I can't really move or do anything. And I just said, you know what, God, I'm going to do this. And I said, and I just stopped while she was talking. I said, I got to say something to you. And I said, the Lord says to me that you're smiling on the outside, but inside you're bitter towards Him. And it's a breakfast meeting. It's a breakfast buffet. And there's tons of other people there. And she burst out crying. And she is crying and crying. And that's all God said to me is that she was bitter. He didn't say why. So I'm also curious why she's bitter. So I'm sitting and and trying to wait. And my wife's sitting and like, what did you just do? And I wasn't sure what is happening, but I knew God was touching her.
Right.
And she composed herself. And I think after about 4 or 5 minutes, and she said that without you knowing, my one eye is blind, my other eye is semi-blind. And she said I went for a normal checkup, and they gave me medication, and it had an effect. And she said, this morning I said to God, and she said, I'm bitter towards you, and if you do not reveal yourself to me, I'm going to take my life. And so God had another plan, and at that very point, from a business perspective, I realized there's an entire people group that need God, that does not know who He is, and they are gods in their own right, and they're searching. So I think from that point, it became a turning point for me, because my heart was nations, and God had a particular nation in mind, and it was the commerce nation. It was media, it was entertainment, and he had that in mind, but I didn't have that in mind. But all I had in my heart was God used me, but I didn't say how, and I just said I'll do anything. And when He pointed out what it is He wanted to use me in, I'm like everything but that. Could you just use me in the church? Like I understand the church thing. You'll come after worship. You'll say what God is doing.
I'm professional at the church thing.
Yeah. I have no experience, and I haven't seen any videos of people doing stuff like this. So I didn't know what to do. I had no experience in it. But the one thing I had experienced is that I understand His heart, and understands His heart for people, and He'd begin to reveal the natures and the hearts of these people to me before I even get to the meetings. And these meetings would be about business and end up with a touch of God touching these people. A lot of the names I can't mention out of respect to them. But one of the stories which is profound is one of the ladies, she's one of the richest ladies in South Africa. And she personally requested that I come for supper. And I was sitting over there, and they Hindus. And they asked me, they were instrumental to building the Constitution of South Africa. They worked closely with Nelson Mandela, and they served with him. And they were telling this story, and I was sitting in their house thinking to myself, like, I was listening to the parts of the Constitution that they wrote, and I was like, I'm living in their reality. I'm living in their legacy. And we as South African, I thought to myself,
because of what they've done.
What they've done and what they've laid. And I was amazed by the accomplishments. And I was sitting there, and the guy turns around to me and he says, Ronald, we've been talking all the time. What's your story? And I told him, and I was raised with no father, and I thought he died. At the age of 30, I went out looking for my brother, not knowing that I'll find my father. I'll never forget this. And I was standing, looking at my father for the first time in 30 years, thinking he died. And he says to me, how did you make it? And I'm telling this story to them, and he said, how did you make it? And I heard an audible voice out of heaven says, I'm your father, I raised you. And I see my entire childhood flash by me, when I wasn't even born again, flash by me. And I saw God being in all of those things. Funny enough, I actually was in a car accident when I was younger, and I think I died because I remember seeing myself on the bed.
Right.
Saw myself on the bed in a car accident. God says, I'm your father. I raised you. And I'm telling the story to this couple, and this guy turns around and says to me, I have exactly the same story. I heard no audible voice out of heaven say anything to me. And I'm sitting there and I say to myself, I say, God, may this convict them that he knows I've done everything I could to build whatever I could build, but I don't have the one thing. And he says, that's the one thing I don't have in my life. And I pray that may that be a seed that you will sow into their lives, that they may find the one thing who completes all things.
You know, what did it feel like when you first started going after the marketplace? I mean, I know you had to feel like what we call back in the States, like a fish out of water. Was it like were you nervous? Did you feel like you didn't have anything? I mean, what did it feel like going into something that you weren't planning on going into? So
God's called us into the media space with the magazine. And currently, I think we're in the top 3 best luxury publications in Africa, but I have absolutely no magazine experience, absolutely nothing. So basically we broke every rule possible from a media point of view because we never understood them. So we didn't know they existed. And God used us as a tool. And he said, go. And we looked at this magazine, and I just started asking myself, how do you design this magazine? And I just in 2 days designed it, and it all came together. And then I was totally mindful of Joseph. I think it was key that God gave Joseph the interpretations to the hearts and these dreams, because Israel was coming.
Right.
So the dream was the tool, and this magazine was a tool to reach a group of people to get to get open doors into this world. Because I think in that space, I don't know one person who does not want to be interviewed on one of the best luxury publications.
Right.
So then everybody's and people begin to line up to be there, and God begins to show these people. And I think the common thread that I've seen in this particular industry is that all of them are searching.
I believe that.
All of them are searching. So for us, it was, for me personally, for most magazines out there or publications, they've got a theme for 12 months. We had no theme for any months. We had a
You're
theme.
Just making it up as you go.
We made it, the whole thing we made up as you go, and the font size, all those kind of stuff. And people ask me, what are your themes for the next publication? I said, we don't have any. And at the end of every issue, God would give a theme for the next issue. So we had people employed that weren't born again, that knew 100% that this is not even our magazine, this is God's tool into the industry. All we had to do, ensure that we gave everything we had and trust God for the supernatural all the time. So open doors. So we knew very much, or my approach was very much like a lion who was territorial, in a sense that God would open the door and we'll just go in. Whatever the landscape looks like, we'll try to influence this landscape for him. So that was really the intention. But from a magazine or from experience point of view, we virtually had no experience. God was kind of coloring in this blank canvas for a people who he's called before the time of creation that he would like to reach. And here's a little guy at the age of 18 at the time and said, God, use me. And he sends me to the industry. This is a luxury. I work with some of the best luxury brands, but I'm born straight out of poverty. Have no inclination that God will use me in a way. Some of these brands I could not even pronounce while you being in the industry. And a lot of people's like, so what's your background? Like, my background's
the
Jesus.
Hood. The hood.
I was good in the hood.
But, there was something when, as you're talking, there's something that came to me. Of course, I wanted Ron to just share with me what he was maybe going to talk about. And, the first thing that comes to me is Peter in John 21. Jesus is basically gone. and he gets this decision: I'm going back fishing.
Yeah.
Well, he was a professional fisherman. That was his marketplace thing. And so even after his encounter and walking with Jesus, he decides to go basically prophetically back in the marketplace. Jesus is left. Okay, that time of walking with him is over, but now he's got to get back in the marketplace.
Yeah.
So he goes back fishing. And the crazy thing about this is his friends go, we're going with you.
Yeah.
And so he brings all of this whole group with him back into the marketplace. Now think about that. So there's got to be some people like Peter's, like you, say, I'm going fishing, and then people watch you and they want to come in and do the same thing.
Yeah.
The thing about Peter is that when he got out there, of course, they see that, of course, John recognized the Lord being on the bank. But the first thing that happens is he says, have you caught anything? And then they said, nothing yet, or whatever, however it goes. And that's redneck, I'm paraphrasing. and so he says, cast your net on the other side,
yeah.
right? Well, then their net gets full. And, I don't believe that your net would have ever gotten full if you hadn't have gotten into the fishing.
No, hands down.
I think if you would have went back into the church thing and doing the revival stuff, I think you'd have an empty net, don't you? I mean,
I'm not sure if it even having it.
Yeah, he may have a fishing pole, but the net gets full, and when all of that starts to happen, John says that's the Lord.
Yeah.
All right. And of course, everybody knows the story. He's cooking some fish. He says, "Bring yours," and all of that's prophetic because the things that you're bringing in, that's coming from the Lord, since you have obeyed Him to get back into the marketplace. Now you're giving all this stuff, your part, to the Lord. But at the same time, there's a prophetic thing to this, is that these guys that are going to get caught in the marketplace are not only going to get the major provision and a new leadership actually rising up, because these guys followed him.
Yeah.
But that's where you're going to get your visitation.
Yeah.
That's where Jesus showed up.
Yeah.
Was when he decided to go back fishing.
Wow.
Now think about that.
That's powerful right there.
I believe that's where, honestly, that's my heart. You hardly ever saw Jesus in church.
Yeah.
And I'm not balking church. You hardly ever saw him at the synagogue.
Yeah.
The main visitations would come when he was out in the marketplace with the people. That was I would say 80% of his ministry. The visitations the people got were not inside the synagogue. It was outside the synagogue.
Yeah.
And I believe it's just like, this Asian lady. That was a real encounter with God. Now, who would she have ever come to the pulpit? Think about that. Would that lady have ever gotten caught in the waters of the marketplace?
No.
You standing from the pulpit.
Yeah.
Think about that. That's crazy.
I think even to add on that, there was one of the guys, he's the youngest billionaire in Africa.
Youngest what?
Youngest billionaire in Africa. Billionaire.
See there?
Yeah.
Billionaire. That's billionaire. I can't say it like that.
We just moved quicker in South Africa. Our Wi-Fi is uncapped over here. So he's the youngest billionaire in Africa, and extremely influential in his own right. And I remember before Donald Trump, he was a speaker at the White House, and he flew down to for an interview in South Africa, and he gave me 40 minutes to do the interview, including a photo shoot, which virtually in our space is virtually impossible. It just means I'll be able to talk to him for 5 minutes.
So you're interviewing him.
So I'm interviewing him for the magazine. He flies down and we begin to sit down, and I say, God, open the door to this, because this is not something that comes around every single day. And he sits down, and the entire thing gets delayed, just means it pushes back my opportunity to speak into his life.
Right.
And so somebody makes an introduction without me realizing, and says, if you ever want to, you got to meet one of my brothers who's Ronald in the media space, and I love him to bits, and you'll see when you meet him. And we're beginning to chat, And he stops me and he says, whatever I was spoken to you by somebody else, and they were 100% correct about you. There's something different about you, and I'm going to cancel my day and spend the day with you.
Wow.
And so he turns it on and he asks me this question. He says, there's something different about you because you're not chasing all the things everybody else is chasing. And as much as they're chasing, I found what I was looking for, so I'm not searching anymore. And he says to me, Ronald, are you spiritual? And then I said, I am. And he said, are you religious? And I said, I'm not religious. I have a relationship with Jesus. And he says, well, I knew there was something different about you. And he's Hindu. And every couple of times in the year, he gets a spiritual guide that takes him off. And he was saying something to me. He says, when you do, good things happen for you. And I was realizing that all these principles, they've caught into some of these principles. And he says to me, can I show you something? And I'm like, yeah, I'd love to see it. And he pulls out his phone and he shows me a message someone sent him. And he says, do you know the scripture? It's 1 Corinthians 13. Then he said, this virtually sums up the most amazing part of love I've ever seen. And I'm sitting over there and I think to myself, this guy, to answer what you just said before, would never come to church.
But he's reading 1 Corinthians 13.
1 Corinthians 13, that God is love. And I'm sitting there and I think back, and now I'm thinking back to the thing I said to God, use me. And my idea of revival was pulpit revival,
Oh, yeah.
outreach revival. And I'm sitting with a guy that influences tons of people. He has his own bank. He's got $4 billion under management. And here's this guy, he's still searching. And I have an opportunity. And 3 months after that becomes global news. He goes through a divorce. And I push back the magazine out of respect. He's on the cover of the magazine. Push back out of respect for him. And I begin to send him voice notes of God's purpose in his life. And he turns it on and he sends back to me. And he tells me after we leave, I want you to personally contact me. I want to stay in touch with you. And I start sending a message about God and God's purpose for his life. He sends message back. He says, I truly appreciate this, my brother. Very few people speaks into their particular areas where they need God. Paul says, it's in my weakness that the strength of Christ is made manifest.
Right.
So in their weakness, who are they running to? So in our case, in the marketplace, we just called to love them. I think that the message for us still remains the same, but the method has just changed.
Methods, yeah. Well, that's our God story. I mean, that was a perfect God story. I mean, I'm sure some of the people that will be watching this, we have a lot that will watch it later on YouTube. I just want to say, if you feel like, you're kind of stuck in feeling like in order to make God move or allow God to move, and you kind of have this format of thinking how he's supposed to move, and it's more of a religious sense, like he's going to come from the stage or he's going to come through a revival or a conference. I mean, this guy's living proof that God's going to call us like Peter's. It's time to go fishing. Yeah. And fishing ain't in a building. Yeah. It's out in the world. And I encourage anybody out there that if you do feel like you're called, but you've had this mindset of thinking being called is to be in a synagogue or to be in a church, I just want to challenge you. It's not that. You can be a minister of God being out in the marketplace like Joseph was. I mean, you look at Joseph's life, he saved a whole nation. Think about it. If Joseph had a dream, can you imagine the encounter he had with God as a dream? Can you imagine if he would have taken that into a synagogue? Well, he would have never been able to, we wouldn't be sitting here.
I think the dream would be too small for the synagogue.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think there's a lot of guys out there that, have a big vision, and it's not going to fit in a institutional church, but it's going to fit in the world. And that's where you're going to get your visitation. If you've been praying for visitations and those that are really called in the marketplace, just go fishing. Do like Peter did and lead a lot of these guys out there in the world. And that's where you're going to find your fish and your provision. And that's also where you're going to see Jesus face to face. All right, that's our God story. Thank you, man.
It's a pleasure.
Yeah. We love you guys. We're going hunting.